Thanks, Ulla. Hi, all. My topic today is taking responsibility on the long term and foresight supporting good judgment in board work. I don't know, do you know what else actually supports good judgment? Caffeine, which you just had, which is great because I think I have the best slot of the day. Right after the break, everybody having their eyes open. We have 30 minutes. I want to use these 30 minutes so that we all get something out of this, all right? So that's also, like this is, in the same way as board work, this is a collective responsibility, all right? I try to give you something. If you don't feel that you're getting what you're here for, ask for something. I have things that are useful for you guys, so I know this. I hope that this, what I'm going to show you next, is something that is actually very useful. Let's see. Just a couple of words from myself. Mostly, I have been doing two things: foresight and platform strategies, platform business models. Currently, as everybody, I'm also having an generative AI startup, because that's what people do these days. I might share you some ideas of that as well later on. It's called consensus.me. You can Google it if you have a device there to see more. But yeah, foresight is the topic of the day, and let's try to stick with it as much as we can. The three kind of main topics would be broadly why boards should be doing foresight, why should you care about the long term, and what's the point precisely for the boards to have this perspective. How one does foresight, a very kind of quick glance. I lecture courses on this topic mostly at Aalto University and Aalto Executive Education, and they are like a long courses. I'm only going to show you like a little glances, but I hope that you get something out of it as well, just to see the broadness of foresight methodologies. And then I have some provocations on how you should pick the methodology you're going to use and what not to do. I think I'm a bit of a contrarian in this sense. And lastly, I think board work, to me at least, it feels like something that pretty much heavily is about how to build a group intelligence. I think the previous talker, the previous keynote speaker, she talked about collective creativity, but I talk about collective intelligence. And I think that there is a very important kind of perspective to the board work, and also kind of linking it to the foresight work, which is basically trying to understand the premises, the change theories, and kind of visions of otherness towards the future within the board. So that's important, I think. Anyway, just to start with the problem I have. So this is what drives me. We have a very comprehensive, a very versatile, and very forward-looking decision-making cultures, decision-making systems in Finland. For example, the boards, they work really well, actually. If you compare to many other cultures, I mean, I know that there are problems, of course, but I mean, we are actually rather good with this. At the same time, I don't know if you know this, but we also have a very comprehensive, very versatile, and very forward-looking foresight system in Finland. We have very good public foresight happening in many layers. We have very good foresight work done in companies as well. We have globally leading companies, consultancy companies also doing foresight in Finland. But the problem here is that the decisions we make rarely guide our foresight work, and the foresight work we do actually, unfortunately, rarely guides our decision making. There is a big issue here, and this is what drives me. This is what I'm trying to fix. So just to give you some context here. Anyway, the topic first, taking responsibility on the long term. Responsibility, of course, is something that the boards, that's what they do, right? But on the long term, why should boards anticipate the future? Well, just some starting points. I think foresight for the first part is the art of the possible. It's about understanding the visions of otherness, seeing things in alternative ways. And as we know, our actions, they have both the intended and the unintended consequences. So if we want to say what's good foresight, well, maybe that would be something that actually increases the intended outcomes and maybe helps us to do more impactful change instead of just random actions. On the why side, this is a summary. I hope you disagree with this, but I think there are broadly 3 or maybe 4 ways or kind of like purposes for the boards to do foresight. The first one I call here blue foresight. This is just my terms. It's about testing strategies or building up towards strategies. Second, we have risks, a very important topic which I think many of you might actually work with. If you're working with very small startups, of course both of these might not be super relevant to you. But then of course then there is this kind of seeing opportunities, seeing fuzzy front ends, opening up new avenues kind of foresight, which I call green foresight. There is a 4th category which is not usually taken inside the foresight work, but I think also people decisions, which is very important thing on the board work, of course, especially the CEO. I think nobody ever said that we get rid of this person at the right time, right? So that's also a category, but that's not usually taken in here, so I don't talk about that today. Anyway, let's start talking about this one by one, just quickly, and then go towards the how section. First of all, I think there are a couple of things which the strategic actions of any company are based on. So the most traditional one, I'd say, is the company capabilities and resources, like Strategy 101. But we also have 2 other things which kind of guide our way of approaching how we do strategic decisions. We have assumptions about the core business, and we have assumptions about its goals. And then we have something I call the theory of change. We have a theory in our heads that how can we manifest change, and we make the strategic actions to actually implement that theory. If you don't have a good idea how your board members see these things, you might have a difficulty in discussing a long-term things. If you're able to have a good discussion on how do you actually see the change happening, for example, in our operational environment, then that might actually lead you to some interesting discussions. So foresight helps, I would say, this is a bit of a brutal view, but I think that foresight helps first and foremost actually making assumptions explicit. When you do foresight work, you do scenarios, that forces you to make your assumptions about the future explicit and talk about those. That's very helpful, even though that sounds like a small step to take. Second, it helps in finding alternatives. Sometimes it helps to finding alternative ways to even frame your whole business. And then, of course, it's about finding how to actually use your capabilities and resources in a changing environment, which is, of course, always a big problem. Yeah. So the blue foresight, as I mentioned, it's about strategy building and strategy testing. And this is oftentimes that you do one of these 2 things. For example, I did a large foresight exercise for all the municipalities. Actually, that's all the regions in Sweden. Some of them had a strategy already, like basically for the built environment and all that, and some of them don't. So we had to do it, both of these things at the same time. We made these major scenarios, and then for those who had a strategy, we kind of played it and simulated it towards these scenarios. And those who didn't have it, they used it as a basis for the strategy. You can do both. I actually prefer to do the testing part for a reason I'm going to tell you later, but both kind of works. Now, a very important point, of course, is that the need to do foresight work really depends on your business. So I'm also doing this, what I call kind of audits for foresight systems these days. And many times what you see in companies is that they have a massive investment in terms of of the benefit towards one particular side of future thinking or foresight. And then they have maybe neglected other parts. But if you are a small startup working in tech space, I mean, you don't really need much of a social vision, perhaps. So maybe that's not something you should do then. So I just want to say that, like, there was this, the topic of this talk before I was asked, like, should we change this, was something like you're doomed to fail if you don't think about the future. I don't think that's true at all. You can do rather well without having a future-oriented mindset. Sometimes that even might actually blind you if you're not open-minded about it. At the same time, I think that that's also also so that your long-term prospects, at least the science says, the long-term prospects of your company should improve if you think about the long term. So basically, that's obvious, I guess. So yeah, before and after the foresight work. Now, if you think about how we should kind of like approach these things, I think it's very important to understand, especially you're young board professionals. You have people at boards sometimes who might be old. So it's good to understand that the different times, they actually require different ways of thinking. In the post-war Finland, we were very much dependent. Our whole modus operandi was about dependence on others. We had a massive change of work at that time. It's not now, it's then. And we built these kind of social systems, welfare states and all that. In the 90s, I think it was much more about independency, economic liberalization, entrepreneurship, globalization, and building kind of a capitalist-oriented welfare society. And today, it's much different from the 90s. I think this is important. Today, it's about interdependency. We are, well, for example, NATO is a very good example. We are now very much interdependent. It's not about independence, it's interdependent. I think the platform society, geopolitics, and the climate becoming one of the actors, they really change the way we should think about the long term. And I'm not going to spend a long time on this. I would love to, if you want to discuss about it, let's. But I'm going to share just a couple of ideas on these three topics, and then we go to the how. So this is like, I don't know, some people call these megatrends. Everybody knows this, right? They are interchangeable. We can't really avoid them. We have the digitalization going through, like as I mentioned, everybody has their generative AI startup these days, as I do. It's funny. I wrote 2 books about this. I'm going to basically skip this slide so that I don't start to go to that path. But I think it's super important in any industry to understand what happens in this space. And what might help you here is that what we see is that there are these low regulation, intangible industries, like media industry, where the change is happening basically rapidly. And then you have industries like which are more tangible, like building or construction or mobility. And then you have industries which are more regulated, like finance. And those industries always kind of follow the same path. It's twisted, of course, but they take a much longer time. So if you want to understand what happens with the generative AI in, say, education, it's a good idea to try to look at the media space, the music, and all those intangible industries, and then understand it from there, even though it's different. Regarding the climate, I just want to share this because I've noticed that even though everybody knows this, they haven't really grasped this point. So what we see here is the IPCC graphs. Looks kind of nice and smooth, the transition, right? You just like basically bump into it. But when you look at the yearly CO2 emissions, this is the same graph. This is just cumulative, this is the yearly. What we should do here is to reach a graph something like this, right? This is a massive change in all industries. You just have to start closing factories as fast as you can if you want to reach this goal. It doesn't really matter what you think about this goal. This is going to happen somehow anyway. It's going to change everything. So just to kind of like give you this context again. And the third one, I think it's kind of like a new one, but I think we are going towards a more kind of strategic capitalism era, which is also super important for companies. Maybe not for the smallest ones of all the time, but anyway, it's important to understand. Basically, companies are more crucial kind of tools for the state to leverage and get some power in the kind of geopolitical struggle. And I think this is really something that might change, for example, how your client works if it's a big company, or how you actually can find some benefits from the supply chain. A good example of this is that McKinsey, the consultancy, they made, I don't know how many years, 40 years, they were selling efficiency. Efficiency is in contrast to resilience. They are struggling now because they can't really sell both at the same time, or it's difficult at least. Right, let's go to the red foresight, the risk segment. This is a fascinating topic as well. It might be that you're actually as well versed this as I am, because boards do a lot of risk work. I know this. I don't know how many of you have been actually doing like risk workshop or something like that. Yeah, kind of figured. So, I just say that typically these workshops kind of try to categorize risks in terms of their impact and probability. It's a nice way to do it. You can do it otherwise as well. Sometimes this kind of a framing kind of leaves out the tail risks and all those kind of things. Again, I think a good reminder in here is to understand what's the magnitude you want to tackle. There are both two big risks for a company, not for the public sector, but for a company. If you like notice that you're talking about de-dollarization in your risk workshop, probably you shouldn't, because I mean, if it happens, everybody goes down. And then there are also these kind of too little risks as well for some people, but that's another story. On the green foresight side, I think that it's good to understand that boards also can have good judgment and take responsibility on these novel opportunities. Even though this is usually considered to be something that goes to the, I don't know, some R&D department or whatnot. I'm going to give you an example which I've used before, so at least you have heard it. But anyway, that there is this situation that, like a good opportunity that you face, sometimes it's so powerful that really it wins any strategy you might have. This one is a place where you can develop film, like this. When you have take a picture, you can develop film. And what happened in this industry was that the devices you use to develop these films, they every year they got smaller, cheaper, and faster. And the development was rather linear. So everybody in the industry knew what happens with the devices you use. First, the whole industry was about those people who take the photographs. They sent the films by mail to large factories. And those factories every year, they made more profits because the devices were cheaper. And like if you set up a factory, it's always cheaper and you can get good margins out of this. So every year they kind of benefited from this linear trend until they reached a point where somebody had this idea that, hey, it takes only 24 hours to develop these films. So what we can do is kind of scrap the whole, like a factory long way away thing and set up these small kiosks for cars where you can basically promise that you travel this route every day anyway, so come here tomorrow and we have your films developed. The devices, like the quality was worse, but this was such a good promise for the users that they actually really harmed the industry, the old industry. And none of the old industry players managed to get to this new phase. But this continues. Then the time was only 8 hours, and somebody had this idea that we can put this into subway stations. And again, you take the industry away from these guys. Another like different set of companies made these things. Then it's only maybe at some point 1 hour, and you have these kiosks in supermarkets, and nobody's using those subway stations anymore. And of course, at some point, then digital photography came out, and the whole thing changed again. But I mean, that's a different story. This is more simple story. What you have is linear trend, which you should be able to understand if you're at the board, at least in terms of what's going to happen. And if you only kind of really want to get money out of it, you might be blinded by the fact that it's not only helping us, it might also change the user behavior in the future. So regarding the companies who couldn't really transform, and those were mostly like every company basically, to the new reality, what they had was a lack of insight in understanding the impacts of these simple trends. That led to a lack of empathy, which is very important in future work, to try to have empathy towards the future. Regarding these emerging customer needs, the customers really didn't want high quality photos, they wanted their photos fast and conveniently. And then this then led to inability to think about the timing. And timing is always the most difficult one in doing these kind of things, especially in long term. It's really difficult to time things right. But I mean, this is the path you might want to take, for example, trying to understand the customer needs and the timing then when the trend hits the right point, then you might be able to time things right, at least somewhat. It's really difficult. I don't really have good cases of just somebody doing this, but maybe Apple could be one, but anyway. Yeah, on the foresight-proof strategy, I would say that it leans on all of these three things. So you have the blue side, the strategic intelligence side, you have the risk mitigation side of it, and then you try to also grasp these fuzzy front-end opportunities that change the whole model, change your business logic or whatnot. Not going to use too much time on this, but I think it's a nice model. The whole point of this set of arrows here is basically that people often think that decision-making happens here, and it does, but it does only in a way that you negotiate with the inevitable and the opportunities. So that might help you sometimes, especially these long-term things, to understand it in the way that I'm not actually trying to make a decision out of the blue. I'm trying to negotiate and find a way how we can use the opportunities to actually answer to these inevitable trends that happen in our industry. This is just another way of pointing the whole thing. So here we have, say megatrends. They kind of build a new operational environment. That leads to new ways of value creation. And that then might guide your strategic choices. So just one way to kind of frame it. This is from a Demos Helsinki project. I worked there for almost 10 years. Right, let's go to the how. So this was just to try to get you to the why. Why should you do it? What's the benefit? On the how side, I think even though this is fuzzy because there are thousands of different foresight methodologies, every consultant is selling you their own. It's because it's basically impossible to falsify something that happens in the future, so they can sell you anything and look good while doing it. But I mean, almost any project should have these three parts somehow. You should be able to scan, you should be able to speculate, and you should be able to execute. Speculation is important here because we want to make this little division between strategic work and foresight works. Foresight work is about alternatives, strategy is about oftentimes anyway trying to find the path that fits you well. So that's on the execution side here in this framing. All of these phases have subtasks, something like monitor trends or ideate possibilities. Just to give you a bit of a kind of a context here, nothing surprising here. And all of these subtasks, however you want to kind of divide them, they have foresight-specific methodologies and conventional, normal methodologies to do it. I want to point this out because sometimes it makes more sense to just do a study without any foresight framing on it. It might actually be more impactful even because then it's a normal study and not something fuzzy and long way away. I really myself like a couple of methodologies here, and if you have any questions afterwards, I'm willing to talk about any. I also teach the methodology course, so this is just a very small subset as mentioned. But I think these three have some power in them which is useful for you to at least grasp. So design fiction, building empathy with concrete examples. Prediction markets, a bit of a newer one. I don't know how many of you know what a prediction market is. Somewhat, some people, yeah. It's a nice way to approach risks, for example. And scenarios, a very typical futures methodology or set of methodologies trying to narrate the system's change. On design fiction, so this is basically just building something concrete that crystallizes your idea of the future, improves the discussion within, for example, the board work. This one is a cookbook where all the recipes are printed or artificial meat. You can't do any of these recipes just yet, but you might be able to do it soon. It's a very nice way to kind of, for example, for a food company, what would be a good discussion piece to have. Even you don't even need to have that piece, because that's, of course, costs a lot of money to do it, but to show it, and then let's have a discussion about this. This is another one which could be criticized also, but I mean this kind of a faster horses way of doing design fiction. But anyway, that's for example, car companies. They actually do a lot of the foresight and vision work with prototypes. So I know that BMW, when they have their way of communicating the R&D vision to the CEO, is basically driving a concept car inside the CEO's office. A very powerful way of doing it, of course. Even though then there is this problem that what if the future is not about cars, but or the model might change, but anyway. So prediction markets, there are good, kind of widely used open prediction markets like Polymarket or Metaculus, what you see here. How it works is basically just betting. Betting like you would bet about a sports event, what you see here. But I mean, then you might have questions which are about some events that might be important for example, your business. So I think this is a very nice way to kind of broaden the view, because oftentimes you're very limited in your own assumptions anyway. Or I am, I don't know if you are, maybe you're very open about it. And then, right, yeah, the forecasting. Just here pointing out that we have two main ways of doing forecasting and backcasting. You have a bit of a different focus on them. Backcasting, I would say, most of the time more useful for boards. You start with some assumption maybe and try to see different ways your company can reach that goal. Right, some provocations. I'm out of time, right? Oh, that's bad, because I want to share you something else still. You're willing to continue, even though that might mean that, yeah, like little. Okay, I'll be fast. If you're picking up a foresight methodology, I would really emphasize trying to find the most simple method you can find for the task. The complications on the method, that's not really useful. And then another one, which might be like surprising, I would emphasize having narrow enough goals, because the future is massive anyway. Also picking the tool for the task, not picking a tool and then finding the task for it. And then the third one, which it might be surprising to you, because everybody's trying to sell this kind of a cultural change to more foresight-oriented way of doing things. I think that it's actually more impactful to pick a strategic question and then use foresight to answer that question than to do it the other way around. On the collective intelligence building, I just want to say that we have basically, companies have competitive intelligence about their competitive advantage. They have market intelligence about, market trends, user needs or whatnot. And then they have what I call strategic intelligence, the other stuff which is relevant to them. So oftentimes people are trying to grow the market share. It might be more useful actually to try to grow the whole market size. And actually, if you're able to understand what happens in this segment and to position your company on the right side of the future, I think that's the most impactful thing you can do. And of course, these things oftentimes fall into the company itself. But this one, usually it's on the responsibility of the board. People don't do this much in the companies. So I have a tool to build strategic intelligence. As I mentioned, not going to tell you about it much, but it's a fun, weird thing. We are able to follow a large number of different statistics, news, reports, publications, whatnot, and then we're able to condense them into these phenomena descriptions. So if your company has a very critical strategic intelligence that's about the emergence of hydrogen economy in Finland, we're able to automatically update that information and actually peer verify it with researchers who are doing this research, their research in the field. So it's rather interesting. Last slide. So I think the foresight is really a useful tool to build up and build support the good collective judgment in board work. To me, like this is of course somebody talking who doesn't really do much board work. I have a couple of companies and have boards, but I mean, it's a different thing anyway. But I don't think that boards should be responsible in the easy decisions, and in hard questions that actually end up to the board or even don't end up to the board. They are the ones that really require the collective judgment. And also, I don't think that boards really need to have answers regarding the future. But what they really need is to have like the ability to ask good questions about the future, and that's a really difficult thing to do, and especially it's a really difficult thing to do when those things are not brought to you. So that's just something I think that the foresight work can really build within your board. Right.